What was your, oh shit, this person is a psychopath moment when meeting people? A kid I went to primary school with invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him because it was a private school and he was only a student there because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go but didn't want to be a dick like everyone else, so I said yes, but I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them a single stick sticking up in the middle, while others had a thin plastic tube poking out. He was very excited as he started digging up one of the spots with a hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me he likes burying things alive. Sometimes he seals the jar tight, sometimes gives an air hose, and even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep or you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally, he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animal. I was 8 to 10 years old at that time. I'm 52 now and it still makes me sick to think about that. I was dating this dude for a few months and we were getting on really well, then we both ended up having to move for our jobs at around the same time. He wants to try long distance, so we do. We call most days and watch movies together in our off time. The time zones mess it up a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Out of the blue one day, he just says he doesn't want to be together. I'm like, wow, okay. A little blindsided, but sure. So I start just going about normal life again and hanging out with friends, the normal post-relationship stuff. After about a month, he begs, like absolutely begs to get back together. Movie-type stuff. Sending flowers to me at work, sending handwritten cards almost daily across thousands of miles, and even bought me a ticket to fly out to see him. So I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll go and see what he has to say. Worst case scenario, I just fly home. So I got a ticket for 2 days after because I just figured I could head out if he was being a dick. He picks me up from the airport and is basically how he used to be, just telling me he missed me and he regretted it as soon as it happened and it was the biggest mistake of his life, the usual. So we stay with his family because he's like, oh, please don't get a hotel. I already feel bad enough about the whole month. Just stay with us. And I just thought, hey, free room, I guess. Everything is completely fine for the first few days, and then I get this alert on my phone, and it's a hurricane warning and saying they're pushing my flight for 4 days later. I'm like, crap. I need to get back to work. I only took like 3 days. When he gets back to the house from work, I tell him about it, and he's like, oh, I know. We already started boarding up the windows. I was a little freaked out, but not too much because I guess that's normal for big hurricanes. So the next morning, he shakes me and wakes me up and tells me to come to the living room. I was like, okay. When I do, it's him, his 2 brothers, his sister, his mom, and his dad, people I have only met on this one instance, and he has a binder. They sit me down and each of them reads a passage from the binder of why we shouldn't be together and why I need to move on. And he breaks up with me in his parents' house, in front of his siblings, in the middle of a hurricane power outage. Then, because of the hurricane, I was stuck there for 4 more days with these freaks. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up, I could easily tell he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he says, isn't it crazy that I could swerve off the road and kill us all right now? I told him to get off on the next exit and canceled the ride. I also reported him to Uber, so hopefully nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic again. At a party in high school or just after it, we were doing late-night juvenile things like Truth or Dare. I knew most people there pretty well except the new boyfriend of my friend's sister. I'm not entirely certain how it came up, but he admitted to the entire group that he had sexually assaulted a dog. We were drunk and high, but everyone sobered up with that. We were too young to know what to do with that information, but we all just shut up and quickly left the party. She broke up with him not long after. I can't imagine doing something that awful to a helpless animal, but admitting it to a group of strangers seemed downright sociopathic. I was glad to never see his face again. At a party once I met a friend of a friend who worked as a nurse at a local hospital. She was of the sort who would sigh heavily and use the unique stresses of her job to bring her the attention she was looking for. She took the spotlight with pleasure and started talking about how hard her job was. When I asked if there were things she liked about her job, she beamed and explained that she worked primarily in maternity. However, her anecdotes had nothing to do with mothers or infants. She spoke primarily of how wonderful it was to be in charge of these women's lives. She explained how fragile they were in those moments, and how even after delivery she was the only one on the floor for hours who would be able to forecast if there was going to be life-changing complications. She absolutely glowed as she explained how these people's lives were in her hands. The conversation steered in other directions amongst partygoers, but she reclaimed it on the topic of high school experiences. She shared an anecdote on how she was rejected for an advanced choir position and blamed it solely on the poor judgment of the instructor. Years later, she got to sing at the instructor's funeral. I'll never forget the pride she took in having control over other people's lives. It struck me as the most basic display of evil. That seems to be somewhat common in the nursing field. I dated a nurse that helped physically and mentally disabled children. She turned out to be a nightmare. After sharing a long list of experiences I'd had with her to a therapist, they deemed her a narcissistic sociopath. Probably should have bailed when she told me a story while laughing about catching her ex-husband in bed with another woman, and her first instinct was to grab a metal baseball bat and start beating him and the other woman with it. I also found out later that she has a repeated history of assaulting her partners and then calling the police to say she was the one assaulted, giving herself marks before the cops come, and then doing everything in her power to take ownership of any of their belongings she has access to. I could go on for days about the unhinged stuff she's done. My ex-fiancé told me that if I were to get pregnant with a girl before a boy, he would push me down the stairs and make me miscarry so we could have a boy first, as many times as it took. We broke up, and afterwards he convinced me to talk things over with him. I got into his car and he proceeded to calmly explain to me that it didn't matter if I took him back or not, as he headed to the expressway. I asked him where we were going, and he remained absolutely silent. He started gaining speed, but the pitch in his voice never changed when he finally spoke and began a diatribe about our love and how we would be together forever, no matter how many people wanted to pull us apart and no matter if I saw it yet or not. I again asked him where we were going, and he said a neighboring state where no one would know or find us, with a very creepy smile, one that lives in my mind to this day, but I can't recreate. All very calm. I had to call my mother and she had to talk him down, beg him to bring me back home. When I was back home and refused to see him, he stood outside my family home through all hours of the night and started singing songs to me over the phone about how he was going to burn my house down and kill everyone inside if I wouldn't go outside and talk to him.